Hey, Willowbrook. My name is Jared. I'm one of the pastors at the Madison campus. Thanks for joining us for another Daily Devo. If you've been tracking with us, you know that we are in the Gospel of Matthew. And where we land today is kind of a unique passage where you have two very distinct things taking place. Jesus is going to give his second of three predictions, prophecies, if you will, about his death and resurrection. And then we have a very unusual passage where it actually talks about Jesus paying taxes. So let's check it out. Matthew chapter 17, starting in verse 22. It says, "When they came together in Galilee, he said to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life.' And the disciples were filled with grief." That there's been other times where Jesus predicted his death and resurrection where they were more veiled, more analogous, if you will, more metaphorical, like where he talked about the temple being destroyed and then it being rebuilt. But here, he's just really straight up. And the disciples, it seems like they are starting to understand, because here we see that they are filled with grief. They loved Jesus. They not only were bought into his ministry, but they loved him. And so grasping the fact that he would be leaving them, it hurt them. But we don't stop here. We continue on, and it says in verse 24, after Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" Now, I've been to Capernaum, and I've actually been to the side of the temple there. The temple tax was something in the New Testament that males 20 years and older had to pay. In fact, that's why a lot of scholars say they think with a great degree of confidence they know that most of the disciples were teenagers, because there are other scriptures that seem to convey that when Jesus went there to the temple with his disciples, that only one, maybe 2 of the disciples had to pay the temple tax. But here, Jesus is with Peter, and Peter gets approached by one of the temple leaders and says, "Doesn't your rabbi have to pay the temple tax?" Scholars say probably Peter was approached because he was considered the leader of the disciples. We know that Jesus was closest to Peter, James, and John, and it seems that Peter, again, his name is mentioned first in that triad, Peter, James, and John. Whenever your name was mentioned first, it always represented leadership or position. And so no surprise here, Peter's approached and they're asking, "Hey, doesn't your rabbi pay the temple tax?" And Jesus is basically going to tell Peter, I'm actually kind of exempt from the temple tax. And he gives the analogy of, hey, if there's a ruler, who gets taxed? His children or his subjects? And Jesus basically says, the subjects get taxed, but not the children, not the sons. And he is basically saying of himself, hey, if I'm paying the temple tax, I'm the son of God. I don't have to pay the temple tax, but let's go ahead and do it. In fact, the scripture says Jesus did this not wanting to offend anybody. And then this unusual miracle happens where Jesus sends Peter out to the Sea of Galilee to catch one fish with a hook, not a net, because he was only going to catch one fish. And in that fish was the exact amount for the temple tax for both Jesus and Peter combined. What's our takeaway from this right here? Well, I think there could be several things. The miracle power of God, of Jesus, but also that Jesus, in spite of probably thinking that some of the taxes were unfair of his time, in spite of the Roman occupation of his time, and in spite of being exempt in his own words from the temple tax, Jesus went ahead and paid it. Jesus was one that oftentimes would do things, even though he did not have to set an example for us. So whether you agree with the laws of the land, whether you agree with the taxes of the land, you need to pay your taxes. Jesus, whether he felt like he had to pay the taxes or not, he did so. I hope you've been following on and enjoying the scriptures with us. Look forward to seeing you back tomorrow as we continue on in the Gospel of Matthew. Have a great day.